because I think we need really to put these topics on the map and present it to the world. What role the Netherlands on a world's brighter scale brought into all the stuff that we are confronted in now. And of course, me as a person of color, to live in the Netherlands, and Karim said it often, Peter, also in former podcasts that you have, the Netherlands, it is very, very hard and very difficult as a person of color to live in the Netherlands. I always say, as a person of color, you swim in a very toxic pool. The Dutch have in their history books, like, they talk about German occupation, Japanese occupation, but they talk about the Dutch presence in Indonesia.
If you go to the National Archives in The Hague, which I did frequently, there's a lot to read about all the horrible crimes that the Dutch have done. And yet, I have to admit, it's very smart how they present themselves to the world as benevolent, as progressive, as tolerant. And it's such a big, it's a big lie, and only a very sugar-coated layer of then people come up with, but you can go to Amsterdam and you can, smoke weed, and that's so free. And as a gay person, I can walk around. All that, it's such a thin layer of fake progressiveness that hides all this, also the conservative ideology and also the racism that indeed the Netherlands was capable of in all these centuries and is still doing it.
If you're connecting the dots, you have a huge problem in the Netherlands. A huge problem. Because then, of course, certainly other elements of this system are popping up and make your life, I tell you, very complicated. Very complicated.
So then, as an Indonesian, you already are a minority. You do almost not exist in the minds of the Dutch. And then when you start to speak up, oh my, you will be, many of the people that I met here were criminalized.
If you visit Amsterdam, just to give you an example, you come in Amsterdam, everywhere in the city are symbols of the VOC. Now I make imagine this in Berlin. You are Jewish and you come and everywhere you see swastikas. I mean, how should an Indonesian feel when he walks through Amsterdam? Like, oh yeah, you were our slaves and blah, blah. I mean, and then we have, of course, still Sinterklaas, Black Pete and all. So there's still elements that the Dutch don't have to take responsibility because everything is normalized.
It is personal too, in a way. I mean, it has a personal impact when you are being addressed on your racism. It does something to you, and it's very physical almost, So it's not that I don't have that, or that I also, maybe in the past, I have also, I'm also guilty of, white-splaining or being very defensive about certain ideas, or I kept defending many things. But I began to see along the way that I think it has something to do with ego, and I think that the white constructed ego, it's in fact it's a very childish ego. It's underdeveloped. It can only kick, and it cannot really formulate in argumented or deeply. It is a child. It is screaming, basically. And I would say to the white people that sometimes, when these topics are discussed, like you are doing, and you feel this has an impact on you, just keep reading, and observe yourself. Take the time, just keep reading and observe what it does to you, because if it does something to you, it does not mean that it is wrong or that it is not something real. It's the opposite. It is something real.
This self-hatred, brown and black people, is unbelievable in the Netherlands.
Okay, welcome everyone. We are here today with two very interesting guests from the Netherlands. We got into contact with each other because you guys contacted us and said, "Hey, wait a minute, these two gentlemen are very similar to us," and we started to communicate a bit. And indeed, there seems to be a lot of similarities between us. Um, so we are here with Danny Samar and Marjolein van Pagee, and Marjolein is an author and historian, somebody who knows a lot about Dutch colonialism, and Danny is half Indonesian. Can I say that? Half Indonesian, half, and then quarter Dutch, quarter Sami, Northern European. And you guys focus a lot on imperialism, racism, history of Dutch colonialism, very similar to what Peter and I often focus on. And I thought, okay, we can have a good conversation today because people often don't know that what we see today, the kind of world that we see today, whether it's the Dutch leading NATO or at least our former prime minister, or whether we see apartheid in Palestine and a genocide in Palestine, people often don't know the roots of these kind of developments and the extremely important role the Dutch have played in that kind of world system that we see today. For example, apartheid is a Dutch word. Often people don't know that. Also, the implementation of apartheid in Indonesia or in South Africa is done by the Dutch. The Dutch were prolific slave traders. People often also don't know that. So I think today, if we want to understand where we are today, think about the genocide in Palestine, we must understand the past. And one way to do that is to delve into, okay, where did that come from? And the Netherlands is in that sense very important. Now, before I talk too much, maybe you guys can introduce yourself a little bit. Who are you? What do you do? And then we jump right into it. And I'd like to start with you, Marjolein.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Marjolein. I'm a historian. I was actually first educated in arts, like Danny, but more visual arts, photography, and that brought me now 15 years ago to Indonesia. I was a photographer. I went there because I wanted to know about what my grandfather did there during the Indonesian Independence War. And yeah, then you run into this big history of the first Dutch colonialism, and then you start to understand there's actually a world system that is, the European world system that we still live in today. So from photography, I later on also went to university in Leiden to obtain my master's in history. And I also founded, first I founded an organization named Historie Bersama. It means something like shared history. And it's a platform, a website with 3 languages, Dutch, English, and Indonesian. And my first idea was to put translations online so that in Indonesia, people can read how the Dutch actually write about them, about history, about the Dutch occupation there, and the other way around. Then later, 1 year ago, I founded another organization or another platform. It's called Media Mondo. So currently, I'm more into more broader topic, not just Indonesia, not just the Netherlands, but also geopolitically. And I share your approach, Peter and Karim, of introducing more non-white, non-Western speakers on geopolitics also here. So that's one of the aims of Media Mondo. And I also have written 2 books about more about the Dutch occupation of Indonesia, about the first genocide on the Bandanese people in 17th century. That's one of the books.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And then now we go to Danny.
Hey, Peter and Karim, thank you for having us. I'm Danny. I'm a performer, artist, musician, producer, and a social worker. And my father's Indonesian. My mom is half Dutch, as you said, Karim, half Sami, northern Scandinavia, like Norway, Sweden, Finland, that area. And What I wanted to emphasize is, of course, I'm very happy you guys speak the same language as me and Marjolein, because I think we need really to put these topics on the map and present it to the world. What role the Netherlands on a world brighter scale brought into all the stuff that we are confronted in now. And of course, me as a person of color, to live in the Netherlands, and Karim said it often, Peter, also in former podcasts that you have, the Netherlands, it is very hard and very difficult as a person of color to live in the Netherlands. I always say, as a person of color, you swim in a very toxic pool, but a lot of different ingredients, what probably will come during this hour on the table. And as a young kid, I was very aware of this. And of course, you don't have the knowledge that you have now, and you do your own research. And down the road, you meet people, and people come in your circle, and people go away, because they made this system. It was so well out thought how they make this worldwide system. What Marjolein is telling, and I'm so happy for a few years ago that I met Marjolein, also in a podcast, and there was also a topic about colonialism and so on. And I said probably something what is not often mentioned on the table. I mean, as Marjolein also said, like the racism and colonialism, we don't have only to do with, let's say, a typical right-wing conservative racist people. No, we have also to do with this so-called left-wing liberal, right liberals. So, and maybe this is something we can put on the table with different topics out of this system, and put it in the conversation.
Yep, sounds good. Sounds good. Peter, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a naive question perhaps to start off with. In the English speaking world, I know this drives Kareem insane. It probably drives you guys insane as well. But the common perception of the Netherlands is of an extremely tolerant, progressive country. Very little is known of the colonial imperialist history of the Netherlands. And it kind of reminds me a bit of the British. They've done an extremely good job of sort of hiding their imperialist crimes and promoting an image of, a very civilized people, kind, polite, etc. And I know a little bit about how they did that. One thing they would do upon leaving former colonial possessions is burn a lot of the records so that historians wouldn't have primary materials to really account for the crimes they committed in various places. But I'm curious if you know how the Netherlands, successive governments of the Netherlands were able to sort of foster this image of a, highly progressive, civilized, kind, tolerant, etc. country without people, at least again in the English-speaking world, knowing very much about the colonial history and colonial crimes of the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I have thought about this also for many years now. And one of the answers is, in my opinion, this is also why I started with Historie Bersama, to break the language barrier. Because in my opinion, the Netherlands got away or hide a lot of crimes behind the language. Who speaks or reads Dutch? Even Indonesians, 280 million people of today, they don't read or understand the Dutch language. So that contributed to that a lot of has been, hide behind the dikes, so to say. And so they didn't even have to remove files or destroy files in historical records. They are there, actually. If you go to the National Archives in The Hague, which I did frequently, there's a lot to read about all the horrible crimes that the Dutch have done. And yet, I have to admit, it's very smart how they present themselves to the world as as benevolent, as progressive, as tolerant, and it's such a it's a big lie, and only a very sugar-coated layer of then people come up with, but you can go to Amsterdam and you can, smoke weed, and that's so free, and as a gay person I can walk around. All that, it's such a thin layer of fake progressiveness that hides all this, also the conservative ideology and also the racism that indeed the Netherlands was capable of in all these centuries and is still doing it.
It is also very, to come to your question also, Peter, it's also on an institutional level, of course. I mean, if you read, for example, history books, the Dutch, and even in most of Europe, but the Dutch have in their history books, like they talk about German occupation, Japanese occupation, but they talk about the Dutch presence in Indonesia. And they talk about the golden century and so on. This wasn't even golden. And it is, you would think, like a civilization in the Netherlands, where we have intelligent people, but it is on purpose. What Marjolein is also telling, they keep it they keep it fragmented. If you connecting the dots, you have a huge problem in the Netherlands, a huge problem, because then, of course, certainly other elements of this system are popping up and make your life, I tell you, very complicated, very complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. As a Dutch person myself, touching on these sensitive topics is exceptionally difficult in the Netherlands. And in fact, the Netherlands is, and many colonial powers were very good at that. The Netherlands is very good also at projecting its own crimes onto other people. So, for example, anti-Semitism is imported from the north, from the Arab world, for example, even though anti-Semitism, of course, is a deeply European problem. Or the fact what you just said, Marjolein, about, oh, we are so tolerant, you can smoke weed, we have gay marriage, and then of course again projecting the kind of anti-gay sentiments onto immigrants and Muslims in particular. And I think this is so important to understand also for people around the world how important the Dutch are for the global, not even just the colonial system, also capitalism, by the way. I write it in my latest paper. But how important the Dutch is for the kind of colonialism, colonial systems that we saw around the world and that we see today. For example, apartheid, I said it before, is a Dutch word. The Dutch were also prolific slave traders. The Dutch were the first, guys, the Dutch were the first global colonial empire, or I should even say superpower, that ruled the world before the British came. Often people also don't know that. In fact, we don't even discuss it in the Netherlands, or we discuss the golden age, like Danny said. That's what we learned in school too. It's the golden age when everything was great, even though that was the peak of empire, of course. So I don't know. Maybe you can explain that a little bit more as somebody who has written books about it, but also as a historian, Marjolein. Can you maybe explain to us what we see today? Think about Palestine, apartheid, genocide, colonialism, race, severe racism. How important is it for us to understand what the Dutch have done? How is that linked to what we see today?
Yeah, I see it almost. Well, let me first start by saying that, of course, as a white person, it took me also a while before getting here. And it took me a lot of conversations actually with some Indonesians in the Netherlands. And they are not a big group in terms of representation. I mean, if you know that in Indonesia there are 280 million people, and in the Netherlands, yes, we have minority groups that are linked to Indonesia, but who do not identify as Indonesian. So that also adds up to, if you want to understand something of colonialism in the part of the world that was once, the biggest occupation for the Netherlands. Indonesia is a very big country. It's often also ignored. It's I think the fourth biggest country in terms of people of the world nowadays, and it's very rich and also in resources. And yet, it is the history of that is so fragmented, but also told by colonial groups. So if you start your search like I did, just with my grandfather who went there, you end up completely confused, because in the representation of our society, of the Dutch society today, we still see the reflection of this apartheid system in Indonesia. So as a consequence, you don't have, when you have like public discussions or debates, it's often, of course, the majority is white of the people talking. Then those minority who are present are of these groups that were collaborative, or that mixed race people that were equal to the white Dutch legal apartheid category. So then, as an Indonesian, you already are a minority. You do almost not exist in the minds of the Dutch. And then when you start to speak up, oh my, you will be, many of the people that I met here were criminalized. And to give you one example, Jeffrey Pondag, his name is Jeffrey Pondag, he founded an organization, KUKB, and he fought. He at one point he started he sued the Dutch government for war crimes they committed during the independence war. It was, in my opinion, it's one of the most courageous recent acts against the Dutch system. Yet this person has been so criminalized. They make him look like he's a madman, like he's not completely mentally right. That's the way you got treated. And yet through these conversations with people like Jeffrey, it is that I began to understand a little bit more about colonialism. And yes, we have to go back a long time. It is my first book about the genocide committed by a VOC captain, Jan Pieterszoon Koen. It is, I think it's around 1621 that he eventually committed a genocide, but it was a process of, many years. It's not just one point in history. And I think the reason that we do not, in the world, in many people do not really realize.
So can you quickly, sorry for interrupting, can you quickly explain who that is? Jan Pieterszoon, and also you said the VOC, right? Maybe for the audience a bit, explain who those are and where the genocide took place.
Yeah, so it's like the British also had such a company. It was the VOC is the Dutch East India Company. And in the name of the Dutch state in that time, they went overseas with these ships and they started colonizing also with military equipment, with they had whole soldiers and everything on board and cannons and everything. That's the way that trade is being interpreted until now, that you go overseas and you bring cannons and military equipment. While in fact, before that, there were trading networks all over the world that did not do that. So Jan Pieterszoon Koen was a very important figure in that history of the VOC. And he went to East Indonesia, to the Maluku region, to go after the nutmeg. And nutmeg grew on one central group of islands, the Banda Islands, and that's where he forced a monopoly on nutmeg by committing a genocide on the original people, who are actually still exist. The descendants of the original population, they went to further East Indonesia, where they still live until today, where they still speak the original language. But also this group is being erased from our history books. And most of the historians say that Jan Pieterszoon Koen killed almost all the original people, which is not true. They can speak for themselves, and they often have a very different story than what you read in Dutch history books. So long story short is that this is one of the many genocides and mass killings that the Dutch committed to be able to build this network of what they call trade, but which is actually it's how do you call it in English? It's robbery.
Robbery?
It's
Yeah.
it's a system. Yeah, it's not trade. And I think the reason that we forget this for world history, I mean, of course, if you talk to historians who write world history, they know, and it's a common fact. But for common people, maybe we do not really know it. Only maybe because the British system that after that took over the lead, I would say, is more recent and was in terms of territory perhaps bigger. But in fact, the Dutch laid the groundwork. They prepared the way for the
Structure
British.
and fundamentals, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just scrolling through my video list because we actually did a video with Professor Gerald Horne. He's an American historian, and we did a specific video about his study of the Netherlands, especially the Dutch slave trade. And so I can definitely advise not only you two, but also people in the audience to check that conversation with Gerald Horne. And I was scrolling it because he had such a good. He referred to it in such a good way, but I cannot find it at the moment. But what did he say again? Let me quickly. Oh yeah. So he said the Dutch need to take responsibility for turbocharging the slave trade. So that is what he said, And Gerald Orr is an American professor. So you see that as a historian, he also says, like, wait a minute, guys, that the Dutch play a huge role in this. And what you're saying, Marjolein, about that the Dutch committed multiple genocides. And I can assure you, I would say more than 95%, if not more, of the Dutch don't even know. They just think we never committed any genocides. And what you just said as well, I think, did you just say that, Danny, about Jeffrey Pondag suing the Dutch government, or was
That
it
was
you?
Marjolein. Marjolein was
Oh, that
telling
was
this.
Marjolein. Yeah, Marjolein.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you say about this Indonesian man a Dutch Indonesian man, or who said that who is suing the Dutch government for what happened. I think this is so important to understand because he is actually, you can say, he is a kind of a pioneer in that sense for something that is becoming normal now. Everybody is trying, or everybody, you see that people are trying to sue the Israeli government where it comes to the genocide on the Palestinians.
Yeah.
What Jeffrey Pondag actually is doing is something that is probably going to be our future as well when it comes to the aftermath of what is happening in Palestine. It shows the importance of people like that. And it also shows that eventually, if you just persist, maybe the pendulum of history will shift in such a way that eventually he will actually get his right, he will get his point, because like you said, he is pushing against a machine, a machine of white supremacy in the Netherlands, especially. You're completely demonized if you highlight racism or you say anything about, oh no, we don't have racism, and how dare you, and don't rile up all these tensions. And he's being, I've seen that video with Jeffrey Pondag discussing the Dutch history of colonialism of his people in front of all these white people, and you just see how you can feel the marginalization of him, almost alone, not completely alone as an Indonesian at that table in front of all these white people, and that's deep rooted in the Netherlands. They're very good at making you feel marginalized if you don't fit the norm. The Dutch are exceptionally good at that stuff, and I don't know. Maybe you wanted to jump into some of the things that were just being said, Danny.
Yeah, I wanted to say something in this sense, as you said, like it is for the white Dutch also, in a sense, they don't get corrected in their behavior. That's, I mean, if you visit Amsterdam, just to give you an example, you come in Amsterdam, everywhere in the city are symbols of the VOC. Now I make imagine this in Berlin. You are Jewish and you come and everywhere you see swastikas. I mean, how should an Indonesian feel when he walks through Amsterdam? Like, oh yeah, you were our slaves and blah blah. and this and then we have of course still Sinterklaas, Black Pete, and all. So there's still elements that the Dutch don't have to take responsibility because everything is normalized. And this makes it so difficult to put this on the surface because you have people, even in my inner circle, also people, white people, like, hey man, come on, it's a child's fest. Why are you so difficult? Or why are you so angry? Like this anger is so embedded in.
And just quickly, Danny, for the audience. So you're talking about Sinterklaas, the festival. That's a Dutch festival, and we have
Yeah,
somebody called Zwarte Piet, which means Black Pete.
Black
And
Pete,
Black Pete is the kind of, you could say, the servant or maybe even the slave
the
of
slave, yeah,
Sinterklaas. And
of
Sinterklaas is a
Sinterklaas,
bit like what you could say as
a
Santa
pope.
Claus actually for the Dutch. And up to today, you're saying we cannot really touch on Black Pete. It's a tradition, and people
It's a
should be quiet
tradition.
about it.
Yeah, yeah, it is like a deep-rooted racist Dutch tradition. And don't dare to touch this because immediately you get the town police squad waiting for you. So it is so hard if you are a lone ranger in this jungle, what's called the Netherlands, and to say something because immediately there will be somebody around the corner hitting you with a hammer. Like, haha, no, you can't be angry because if I'm angry, then I'm this wild Indonesian whatever dude. So the way the Dutch embedded anger. So I mean, I think for me as a person, I have every right to be angry. Everyone should be angry. I mean, anger is not a filthy thing in this sense. And that makes it so difficult, It makes it so difficult. This is why I like your podcast because I see often by Kareem also like this fire. Like, I mean, even if we talk about pro-Palestine demonstration, we are talking about human beings. This should called pro-human being protest. I mean, you know what I mean? And that makes it for me I'm also a very emotional person. It is so hard to constantly you're walking with 100 kilometers an hour against the wall because all these so-called old Dutch traditions are there. I mean, even let's
Yeah.
say a very simple example, one example. If the Dutch national soccer team is playing football, we we have people of color in this soccer squad. There was one guy, his name was Ruud Gullit, very big Dutch football player. The guy had Rasta hair. We have Dutch football supporters who paint their faces black and put a wig on with Rasta hair. And then even this player says, "Oh, for me, it's no problem. It is. I feel it like an honor." I think like, and this guy is the chairman of the Mijnhouse Committee of the Dutch Football Bond, who is against racism. I mean, this is for me insanity on top. This self-hatred, brown and black people, is unbelievable in the Netherlands. And this for me, and that's why I'm so happy to talk with you both guys. We need to dismantle these kind of behaviors and structures and to get it in, let's say, a certain kind of a language to make it clear like how these things functions, that people get an insight in all of this because it's, of course, it's I can say the majority of people around when I'm around my work for a week, I hundred times a day I get stuff on my head like, you're Maluku, yeah, you were good guys because your guys fought for the Dutch and all of this bullshit, and you find a way to work around it and so on because you got a thick skin. But if you think about it, when I'm coming home and you think like, holy shit, this day was like, yeah,
Yeah. So many small of these pop people often say that's a dirty word. So many small of these microaggressions, and of
absolutely.
course that people always refute that stuff as woke, but it isn't woke. I mean, if you're a minoritized or a racialized individual in white spaces such as yourself, Danny, you have to deal with a lot of a barrage of microaggressions every day
Absolutely.
that in aggregate combined have a tremendous effect on your psychology. So I find it very good that you say that. But you wanted to jump in, Marjolein?
Yeah, I have many thoughts right now, but I thought also about first about this Black Pete tradition that has been criticized over the years by many countless Afro Surinamese or Black persons in the Netherlands. And okay, now there are changes. And this is where you see that the right-wing groups are angry about, because they don't like it to that this tradition that people cannot do blackface anymore. However, the left, the so-called, I always call them the fake leftists in the Netherlands. So these are people who see themselves as liberal or as a progressive, liberal, but they actually applaud the development that blackface is being removed. They will say that, yeah, colonialism was bad, and oh yeah, Jan Pieterszoon Koen committed a genocide. Oh, it's so bad. However, there's also there's also a lot of racism coming from that group. What I have observed in the past years working together, for example, with Jeffrey Pondar, and also with an elderly Indonesian lady, Francisca Patipiloi. I saw that you also highlighted one of her videos. Both of them were extremely, were sidelined only because they spoke up against a government-sponsored investigation into war crimes. So, to add on what Danny describes as this toxic daily reality of the people, non-white people living in the Netherlands, it's coming from so many sides and it has so many variations. I know that you studied in Groningen, Karim, and I think it was 2019 or something, I was together with Afro-Surinamese historian Patricia Gomez. She's also being sidelined. She focuses on how the Dutch society dealt with the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and she's very outspoken and very critical. She's also always naming people who are responsible for the history writings. She said, okay, let's go. We should go to Groningen, where there was a sort of history days. So it was like a congress of historians. And the theme was inclusivity. That was the theme of the whole 3 days congress. And we were there, and she was the only Black woman. And they only invited one Black man as a speaker. So that, we cannot say that they're really racist because they invited one. But then the entire audience was white, except from some people with roots in Indonesia, but again, from these groups that are collaborative groups or mixed race groups that were, assimilated.
Colonial mentality.
No Indonesians
what I
at
often
all.
say. Colonial mentality, that's often what I discuss. Colonial mentality, which is a very, very big problem in the Netherlands, I must say, and in particular, I would say as somebody who doesn't even know too much about it, but among Indonesians, I had a lot of Indonesian Dutch friends back in the day who, if I think back about those days and the things they said, I was like, yeah, these are clear-cut cases of colonial mentality. And I wanted to jump in on that a little bit, Danny, with you. But I first have a small question to Marjolein, because I think this is such an important point. I don't know if you guys just saw our show that we did with Dimitri Laskaris. And we talked about whiteness and whiteness in the anti-imperialist sphere. And that always triggers so much emotion. Oh, you cannot talk about it. Oh, it's racist. Oh, I unsubscribe. White people, I unsubscribe. And I find it so important to discuss because, first of all, it's not personal. It's very good, Marjolein, that you said that, because guess what? Whiteness, blackness are invented identities by colonialists. It has nothing to do with you personally. Stop identifying with that. That's number one. But number two, it's very important to me to just ask a question. You're a white Dutch woman, and you also emphasize it. You started with that. Hey, listen, I'm a white Dutch woman, and it took me some time to also see the things the way they are. What is it you think that makes it different for you as a white Dutch woman that you don't shoot into that allergic reaction? You actually you confronted yourself with this difficult past, and you don't see that as a personal problem. And the funny thing is, when we discuss about these things, it isn't also personal. We're not thinking about you personally or Peter personally or whatever. So I think this is very important also for a very large white audience. The majority of our audience is white, which is a good sign in my opinion. My question: what makes it different for you as a white woman, and what can you advise people to do to come to that same kind of mindset as you? Because we really need more white people to turn in that sense, to let go of that stupid identity or importance of that identity. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I know what you mean. And yes, I do also recognize, and maybe Peter can also recognize it. It is when you're, it is personal too, in a way. I mean, it has a personal impact when you are being addressed on your racism. It does something to you, and it's very physical almost, you know. So it's not that I don't have that, or that but and I also maybe in the past I have also, you know, I'm also guilty of, you know, white-splaining or being very defensive about certain ideas, or, you know, I kept defending, you know, many things. But I began to see along the way that I think it has something to do with ego. And I think that the white constructed ego, it's in fact, yeah, it's a very childish ego. It's underdeveloped. It can only kick, and it cannot really formulate in you know, argumented or deeply. It is a child. It is screaming basically. And I would say to the white people that sometimes, you know, when these topics are discussed like you are doing, and you feel this has it has an impact on you, just keep breathing, you know, and observe yourself. Take the time, just keep reading and observe what it does to you. Because if it does something to you, it does not mean that it is wrong or that it is not something real. It's the opposite. It is something real. And in that sense, I do think it's also personal, because we can get rid of this, I think, if we embrace this personal reaction and observe it, and then grow a consciousness on it. That if you conscious about it, yeah, then the ego will, you know, will develop, will go further than only kicking and beating and screaming, you know. That's what I think.
Yeah.
There's
Go
a
ahead, Peter.
There's a saying in American English: if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And I kind of think of that when it comes to politics. You know, the way our brains work when we're confronted with an idea that we disagree with, or which, you know, puts our ego into question, you know, something about ourselves is questioned. Anything that challenges a belief that we have about the world, including a belief about ourselves, like I'm a good person, causes negative emotional affect. It causes a hurtful feeling. So if you can't stand that, then just don't do politics at all. Get out and just listen to other people who do. I mean, I'm joking here. I'm not actually saying people should get out of politics. What I'm saying is you have to grow a bit of a thicker skin. Like, just because you feel bad about something doesn't necessarily mean that the thing you just encountered is wrong. It could just be that it contradicts a belief you have, and that's why you feel bad. It's not the fault of the person who introduced you to the thing that made you feel bad. But that sounded like exactly what
Yeah.
you were describing.
And another thing is, what I observed is the fear of guilt. There is a deep fear. I think it's in all colonial nations, that I think maybe deep down we all feel that it's that the collective our collective, the white Dutch collective, is guilty of human rights violations. It's not consciousness, but I mean it's super unconscious. But I think deep down we know it, that it's something went wrong. And that's why we run away from any discussions on guilt. Well, I think actually guilt is a very useful concept which we can use to develop ourselves and to make, because for example, in my case, my grandfather was a war criminal. He fought against Indonesians who wanted to be free. The natural reaction, because it's my grandfather, I'm from here, I mean, I'm coming from him, the natural reaction is to keep defending him. But I think it's actually, we don't, even if you don't have to, I mean, I don't know if you believe in if in life after life, or if my grandfather in spirit can still be there somehow. But if you think a little bit in that direction, I think we're actually not helping our ancestors by finding excuses for them. I think it's more liberating in a sense to fully acknowledge that what they have done in their life in service of the capitalist world system was wrong. Simple. It don't need to be difficult.
Yeah, very, very, very good, very well said. And I think that reminds me of Max Eyl, one of our guests who was on before. He will be on tonight again. And Max also said that, and I think it's very important for us to understand. He said there's no difference between Hitlerism and colonialism. And I so like that when he says that, because I think as Dutch people as well, we must understand that instead of always pointing at the Second World War, that was the greatest evil. No, our society did Hitlerism. Our society did it in Africa. Our society did it in Indonesia. Our society did it in Latin America. And that is that kind of projection, because you don't want that guilt, what you're just saying, Marjolein. And I think another point is very important, what you say about that defensive reaction that you often see when you say the word white, or what problem of the white identity and all that kind of stuff, is that indeed our cultures are very good at making us personally invest in an identity that is imposed on us. Like whether you're in the Netherlands, they have words for everyone. They have allochtoon, and they have words for if you're half brown and if you're completely brown and black. They have identities for everyone. But it becomes an identity that people start to invest in. Cultures are really good at making you internalized and imposed identity. And it's the same with being white. White is an imposed identity. You're just an individual. You live in the Netherlands. There's nothing different between you and Danny, for example. But by saying, but by creating the idea of white and not white, there is an artificial distinction between you guys. And if one says something about the other artificial distinction, you get outraged, and you have to step above these kind of imposed identities. And that brings me to what I just talked about to you, Danny, about that colonial mentality. I find it so fascinating. I'm studying that here in Hong Kong, colonial mentality. I lived in Malaysia, and I now live in Hong Kong, of course. Both societies, exceptional problems with what I would call colonial mentality. The internalized kind of narratives and stories of the colonizer that expresses itself in many ways. For example, identifying as yellow, for example, or identifying as black. These are imposed identities, but also internalizing the narratives, feeling pride because you were part of a colonial empire, for example. And I wanted to ask you, Danny, how do you see that among Indonesians in the Netherlands, and maybe in your personal experience?
My personal experience, my grandfather was a part of the KNIL, this Dutch army who fought against the Indonesians. So let's say the narrative in the Netherlands is when, for example, I will meet somebody out of the Maluku area, but growing up in the Netherlands, definitely we both have that our grandfathers fought for this army. But definitely also, I can say this probably almost 100%, he will say, oh yeah, man, I'm proud of my grandfather, and what he did, and they didn't have a choice, and so on. And I always say, like, oh, wait a second. I don't want to touch the love that you have for your grandfather. He can be a really nice grandfather for you as the role of a grandfather. But it is wrong. It is wrong. They killed their own brothers and sisters for the Dutch. I mean, I told you already before, Karim, and I will tell it to Peter also. Like, I always make when I would have a white grandfather, and my white grandfather would choose the side of the Nazis between 40 and 45. Definitely, this guy and the family, it would be the shame of the family that this guy was an NSB'er, so to say. We only make the difference with, let's say, how we call these people. They don't identify as Indonesian, but Indies, and the Maluku people, I've always called made in Holland, will definitely defend that they fought for the Dutch. And of course, we should take also within that this indoctrination and so on, the way how they are programmed, yes, that definitely plays a role. But if we accept as a Dutch society that a white grandfather made a mistake to choose the Nazi Germans, why is it so difficult for me? It's not difficult to say as a descendant from a grandfather who fought for the Dutch against his own people. For me, I'm cutting the line there, and there needs to be somebody. I'm feeling this really sincerely. I mean, if we want to, we have a nice word, Peter. I always say we have the word called samenleving, is living together. The only thing is, in the Netherlands, we don't live together. That's the contradiction. It is it's one of the most beautiful words in Dutch is samenleven, but we ain't do it. And we need to speak out. As Karim asked me this question, it is complicated. I grew up, for example, my father also teach me, you cannot trust Indian people who identify or who are mixed Dutch, mixed Indonesian. You cannot trust them because they were the occupiers. Later on, I was like, oh, wait a second. This is incorrect, Dad. These Indian people were on the higher ladder of the apartheid system, but did just as those Malukan people in the Netherlands work for their occupier. So there is no difference. So you see how twisted this narrative is, and it's so hard to come away from it, because I can tell you, if I tell in a, let's say, Maluku environment, and I will tell like, hey, well, guys, wait a second, you can be proud of your grandfathers, but I ain't not proud. For me, it stops there. He fought. If we want to decolonize, I need to make a statement. I need to make an example. Sorry, guys, it's incorrect. It stops here. If we want to decolonize, we need have a clear look at the past of what our contribution was in this system. That's the only way how we can get out of the system. But at the other hand, if we do that, we ain't gonna fit anymore in this capitalist system. Because to fit in this capitalist system, we need to walk in line with the narrative in power, so to say. So as I said, it is difficult, and it has a lot of hidden doors where people can escape. For example, if I meet a person who says, okay, yeah, my grandfather fought for the Dutch, but wait a second, he fought also for an independent Maluku. Okay, why are all these Moluccan grandfathers who fought for the Dutch fought over whole Indonesia and committed war crimes over all Indonesia?
Yeah, and just for the audience, Danny, sorry for interrupting you a little bit again, so the audience will understand this. For us, it's very understandable. But if you're not from the Netherlands, probably people don't really know. You're talking about people from Maluku people. Those are people from the Moluccas. This is an area in Indonesia, and the Dutch promised them independence if they would fight for the Dutch, right, to subdue the general Indonesian population, right? And now today the Maluku people from the Moluccas, they call themselves also Malukus.
Maluku. Yeah, they don't identify
and they
as
distinguish
Indonesian.
themselves from the rest of the Indonesian population, and that's that divide and conquer and internalized colonialism you still see today, right?
Absolutely, because there is a difference between, let's say, the Maluku in the Netherlands, and there's a difference between the Maluku in Maluku, Indonesia. There's definitely a difference. and it is, how do I say this? It is so it is so hard imprinted for this group in the Netherlands, to say like, yeah, okay, there's a little slight change going on, but still, I think we need generations that people can look back and say like, okay, this was just a mistake. And I always say, to keep a long story short, when I meet people from the Maluku area in the Netherlands, I always say, why are you here? Keep yourself a mirror. Why are you here? And that's already, actually, the answer is already so embedded. I mean, it's not me like fingering to the people, you people are wrong. We are talking about a system. And if you want to have a good insight in this system, it is so hard, as what Marjolein is also saying, to look in the mirror and breathe. There is still a life afterwards, definitely, So yeah. But it's, yeah, as I said, it's not a popular statement to make.
And to give you an illustration of what you just said, so in 2000, I think it was 2021 when my book on Banda came out, that so we were also in a sort of online podcast setting with a lot of people there, and then Danny was literally, because my book was about Maluku, the region where the genocide was committed, I attracted a lot of people in the Netherlands with Maluku background. So there was like a talking show with a lot of Maluku people in the Netherlands. And then Danny was literally the only one there who said that what their grandfathers did was wrong and was collaboration with the colonizer. And that's how actually I later on contacted him. And so far, he's still the only person that I know in the Netherlands that speaks so clearly about this. Because you know what happens, even if people say very softly, like, yeah, maybe my grandfather did not make the right choice, then the second sentence that always comes up is an excuse of why he did what he did. Yeah, they were poor and they were, recruited and they were promised money. Yeah, that's an explanation, but that does not alter the fact that the reason that these groups are in the Netherlands, and yeah, that also blur the discussion. Yeah, it has to do with collaboration and with siding with the colonizer.
I want to emphasize one thing, guys. I said when we start the conversation, there are certain escapes for the Dutch. We have, for example, one short example, 15th of August. The 15th of August, the Dutch remember the falling victims of the independence war in Indonesia.
Well, actually, they commemorate the 15 August was when the Japanese dropped their weapons and surrendered. That's what they officially remember, but yeah, they.
But let's say in festivity, in how they celebrate, how they in certain ways celebrate this in the Netherlands, it's like about the fallen soldiers, the fallen KNIL military, and so on. I mean, what I don't understand, that it drives me crazy. I always keep this example. Imagine Germans would do this in Berlin on a certain date. The world would be completely outraged. Like, how is this possible? Oh, these Waffen SS were so brave and courageous and so on. I mean, if you think about this, and I don't get it in my head, why we in the Netherlands, if I am opposed to this, then I am the traitor. I am the fascist one. I am neo-colonization or whatever kind of guy I am. And I try to think with my brains, like, but guys, how do you see this if I make this example? I mean, it is so insane.
What I also think is that they always turn it around, and it's because there is also a lot of hatred actually against Indonesian stemming from this. So you have to understand that there is a lot of, because of the divide and rule tactics of the Dutch, also during the independence war, but also before, of course, but after that it became more apparent when they sort of promised these Maluku people an independent country. It was not a serious promise, they didn't even mean it, I think.
No.
And the separatism, this separatist movement and the overrepresentation of separatist movements also blurs the discussions and also turns Indonesia in. They are calling Indonesia the colonizer. I do think that in the current Indonesian government is a neoliberal government that is still there because of what happened there in 1965 with the support of the CIA, with the initiative from the West. They killed a lot of socialist communist people. So that's a fact. But I don't think that you can call a country the colonizer. And that is, I think, the very common comment in the Netherlands. If you talk like us, from within these groups, people are very easy to say that you are actually defending a colonial government, and they call the Indonesian the colonial government. But this is, for me, is the world upside down, because we have to look at who created these divisions and who is still using these divisions until this present day.
There's one point I think is a very good point what Marjolein was telling. Like, it is not, if you look now, present Indonesia with the huge demonstrations of students and so on, it is not that if I'm saying this, what I said before, then I am for the powers in Indonesia. That's not the case. I think that the current president, Mr. Prabowo, is not it is corrupt, militarization, and so on and so on. It's not that I'm pro Indonesian government. That's not the case. It's two different discussions, and all of these arguments is put on one thing. If you say this in the Netherlands, like, oh, you're pro Indonesia, you're pro the government, they are exploiting our people, and so on. No, I see that there are problems in the region. That's no discussion. That's totally clear. It's a capitalist government, definitely. But as I said, to go back to the basics of colonialism, if we want to draw a line, we need to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is such an important point of a couple of important points that you guys discuss. For example, about, that, so you were in that conference, and you were the only person who had critique on the Moluccan ancestors fighting for the Dutch, right? That was
Yes.
what it was about. Yeah. And it's so interesting to me, because it shows how successful Dutch culture has been, not only in dividing people up, Maluku versus Indonesian, but also that people themselves, colonized people themselves, become part of that kind of ranking, and they start to invest in that ranking. For example, I remember when I was a young kid, I had quite some friends who identified as Maluku,
Mm-hmm.
and also a lot of white Dutch friends who would say, like, who would often be quite racist in many ways. They would be against I don't know, pretty much anything, but they would always say, they give this disclaimer, but we're not against the Malukus because they fought for us. And that kind of comment, you could see that among Maluku young people, that gave a sense of like pride, like, oh, we are not really the bad ones. What you're actually doing at that moment is you're internalizing your inferiority, because you're actually saying unwittingly that the judgment of the white Dutch about your people is important for your self-value. You don't even realize it, because this is the power of living as a minoritized individual in a majority population. The majority population actually is the one often who assigns value to you, and people internalize that, and I think that's what you see also. That's that powerful divide and conquer also, that, oh, we are positioned a bit above Indonesians because we are seen as people who helped the Dutch. And you don't realize is that at that point you're actually having a colonial mentality, and you're playing into the divide and conquer, and you're helping the current hierarchies. You're helping the power structure
Absolutely.
of the colonizer in a way. And you see it everywhere. This is also so important today when you want to understand, for example, the Palestinian Authority, the PA, who is fighting for the Israelis, but also all these proxy groups right now in Syria that are fighting for Israel and the United States. This is that divide and conquer. It's not that they are thinking consciously, oh, we're going to fight for the US against our Muslim brothers. No, it's actually they internalize that narrative that they are against the Shias, or these
Yeah.
groups are bad and we are better than those groups. And I think the colonizers have been so good at doing this, and we must go back to understand that. And I think what you see with the Indonesian slash Maluku kind of schism that you see in the Netherlands, that's exactly that kind of colonial game, that internalized colonial game, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I suspect that I think that in the Netherlands there is an overrepresentation also when you look at other conflicts such as Syria. But take, for example, Venezuela, that there are Venezuelans in the Netherlands, but the majority is anti-Maduro, is pro, opposition, and the opposition is openly pro-US. And I suspect that in many other conflicts, that in countries like the Netherlands, maybe also in Belgium and Britain, but that yes, we have minority groups, but who are they and why are they here? And why, of course, I think the Netherlands, for example, is never really, for example, in the case of the Maluku, yes, there was some story about, independent Maluku separate from Indonesia. And later they did that literally with the Papuans. They didn't. So Indonesia was already, they proclaimed the independence in 1945 and the Dutch left in 1949, but they did not leave Papua, West Papua. And those ending up in the Netherlands, most of the time there is a relation to that history. And that, I think, makes it so difficult to have discussions on history or colonialism in the Netherlands, because there are almost no really anti-colonial voices present. And yes, of course, within these groups, I hope that there are also more people standing up who see through this mechanism and talk also against address these issues within their own communities. But so far, it's very rare. And like I said, it's so rare that I met someone like Danny doing that for the Maluku group. And that's, I think it's the Dutch system, the government is still using it. They, on one hand, you think they don't know. Sometimes they write things that you think they don't know history, but I think they know very well how to make use of these separate groups, and they use it.
Well, you can see how successful the Dutch internalize. I'll be quiet quickly, Peter. So you will see how successful the Dutch is in internalizing colonialism into its subjects, because I think a lot of Indonesians have struggled with a sense of internalized inferiority complex to the white Dutch population, often unwittingly. And that's happened to a lot of colonized populations around the world. To give you an example, I don't think it's a coincidence that the most racist politicians in the Netherlands, such as Geert Wilders or Thierry Baudet, have Indonesian roots. They have Indonesian roots. And
yet they don't call it Indonesian, they will call it Indies, which was
Indies, right?
assimilated class of Europeans. So they were Indo-Europeans, and they will never call them. They will be, if you say this to them, like you are Indonesians, they will be offended, because they
here you go.
are trained to hate and to look down upon Indonesians. So this is
There you go. Yeah. There you go. And these are often, you also had those, of course, in other empires, the mulattoes, the mixed people. And these often become the comprador classes, the elites. You had it here in Hong Kong, for example. You had the English-speaking elites. I like to read about it also here in Hong Kong. And those English-speaking elites, until today, often feel a kind of disconnect from traditional Chineseness. And in fact, often they still have colonial flags. They want to be part of the British Empire. And it is such a powerful psychological effect. Danny, yes?
I told you also, like, when I was a young kid, we went to the first generation Maluku, grandfather and grandmother. You come inside, in the middle of the living room, there's a huge picture of the Dutch Queen. Like, I was a child and I was looking at it and I'm like, Oh my God, are you guys serious? It was so, as a child, I was very uncomfortable for my father. My father said at one point, I don't bring you there anymore because you're gonna ask, like, for him, like, stupid questions, but they were very relevant questions. Why do you obey? And why do you have this paint or this portrait or whatever photo of the Dutch Queen in your house?
Well, it reminds me of my class, Peter. You know
Yeah,
it, right? In the
that's why I'm
class, I
laughing.
always, yeah, in the class, I always showed my students in Hong Kong a a picture of two Hong Kong Chinese guys proudly carrying a painting of the British Queen. And I always say to them, that's my class about colonial mentality. And I always tell them at the start of the class, and I ask them the question, why does this picture make me so unhappy? Seriously, that's always how I start the class. And then you get a very vibrant discussion, you know. Some people are like, what does he mean? Other people understand it. Anyways, Peter, go ahead before I talk too much.
Yeah, so many thoughts. Like Marjolein, what you were just saying, it made me think, I think the US is a little more advanced in fake leftism or Baizoa, a great loan word from Chinese we should all adopt. Basically means people who consider themselves to be leftist, but they're not anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist. They focus on objectively less important issues to the detriment and to the exclusion of the most important issues. But one thing that they do very well in the US is use a kind of inclusivity, well, where they'll have, say, for instance, some Iranian Americans who, of course, are all, either monarchists, like monarchists in the year 2025. They still exist. They're an extremely tiny fraction of people in Iran. But of course, in the US, where you had all of these people emigrating from Iran after the revolution who were supporters of the Shah, you have a lot of the right wing emigre community there. And of course, those people will be platformed and put on the stage and talked to. And the discourse will be, well, my Iranian friend agrees with me that it would be a good idea to bomb Iran. So, I'm the one being inclusive and whatnot. So you have that probably everywhere. I mean, some
Yeah.
Irish people in England, anywhere you look, you definitely have the same phenomenon. The question I wanted to ask, though, I think I shouldn't because it would require too long of an answer, but maybe I'll just throw it out there as a challenge to both of you. If you can answer in a very short period of time. I know we've been taking up a lot of your time, and I thank you for that.
Oh, it's all good.
But I'm really curious if you see a connecting line between the way that people are socialized in the Netherlands to learn about Dutch history, to learn about Dutch imperialism, and the kind of positive self-regard that people are somehow imbued with in school to think that their colonial enterprise was somehow a good thing for humanity. And is there a direct connecting line between that foundation and current views on the genocide in Gaza, which the Dutch government, like most European governments, is you know assisting in? Do you see a connecting line there, or do you think they're two separate things?
I see definitely a connection. I think I said it also before we went really let on a recording. I said it to Kareem. Keep in mind that the Dutch had the biggest Muslim country in the world, Indonesia. When they arrived around 1600, I mean, what they actually immediately did was building like more than 6,000 churches. So there's definitely this dehumanization of Palestinians, mocking of Islam, and so on, because the Islam had an introduction in Indonesia, but actually had a natural, so to say, thing with the indigenous way of living in a certain sense. And imagine how the Dutch brought Christianity into Indonesia. That was very aggressive. I mean, there was not some kind of a referendum like, okay, locals, do you want do you want to have a church? Yes or no? This was like put it through your throat, so to say. So I think there's definitely a connection if you look at the current situation in Palestine. Definitely. as I see it. But it is very hard to dismantle, I think, this thing, so to say, because I think also it has to do language and also like how we perceive history, because our timeline is always a linear kind of a timeline, so to say. So it's very hard to how do you say this in English? Unravel this structure. Yeah, but for me, as I said, this Islamophobia for me started already back in the 1600s, so to say.
Yeah, I think that indeed there is a continuation that is often neglected, and also, as I have written in my book, also that I think it was also a continuation of centuries before that. You know, it's not. I think it's not extreme to say that the ideas, the ideologies of that time of these Protestant Calvinists that went to Indonesia were inspired by the centuries of the how do you call that? The
Crusades?
Yeah, the Crusades.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another thing is that actually the Dutch also pride themselves that they did not impose their culture and religion and their language on the colonized people of the Indonesian islands. While in fact, yes, it is also true that there were churches built, but they never, you know, until this day, Indonesia it's not a Muslim country to be precise. It's a country where you can have 5 religion, but the majority of the people, like about 90%, is until this day is Muslim. And the thing is that although they did not, you know, Christianize everyone there, and that a lot of people could keep, in a way, their faith, they were looked down upon because of being Muslim. And there are many examples of that. And this, I think, also, you know, created this mindset that you can still see back in how discussions are, you know, people here, the right-wing people thinking that Muslims are taking over our country. It's like, if you read it, it's crazy, but it's coming from all these sentiments that already exist for such a long time. So I do think that also in the way that the Palestinian people, because many of them are seen as Muslim, while they're also Christians, but in the general mindset, people will see them as Muslims, I think. And then I think in general, they are not seen as equal human beings. And that is something that is so, that's why people, I think, cannot even observe it as a genocide. I think, yeah.
That's the power of racism, eh? So I always say that racism just completely eradicates empathy. It really just destroys it from a human being. And if you really want to experience a society where there's such a lack of empathy for groups of people that are classified as Muslim, I always say just observe the public debate in the Netherlands, even from mainstream politicians. You will be shocked. And I always say people are so up in arms right now about the AfD in Germany and like all. And I say the Dutch are pioneers in that stuff. That's 20 years later than the Netherlands. You know, I must say the Danish are also very similar to us in that sense. But the 20 years ago, we already had that hyper Islamophobia and these parties coming into power and all that kind of stuff. You know. We almost
to link back to our previous conversation on the existing collaborative groups that are not Indonesian and identify as Maluku or Indies, they are not in the majority of them is also Christian. So you see how that also plays back. And when I started my research, I was still, I don't know, 20 years old or something when I started. I didn't even know that Indonesia, the majority of the people is Muslim. Because in my opinion, my first encounter with what I thought had something to do with Indonesia, they were not Muslim, right? So that's also adds to the confusion about what is actually Indonesian and who are they and what a mixed group of people are they, in fact. They do not exist here.
And a lot of anti-Islam kind of mockery you see among those colonized communities as well. I mean, I remember my Indonesian Dutch friends in the past. Same as you, Marjolein. I was unaware that was a majority Muslim country, but the kinds of jokes, in my teenage years that often these Indonesian Dutch kids would make about Muslims and everything. Again, when you look back now, you realize it's just deep internalized colonialism. You know what I mean? Some final words, Danny. We unfortunately have to do a hard stop because another guest is coming. But I'm already going to say right now, this was way too short. So we are going to invite you to again. There's so much to say. I hope you guys are willing to come on again.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
I feel very honored to you both guys, Peter and Kareem.
That would be great.
I wanted to say just one thing. What Kareem said triggered me in the sense, for example, if you look at the current tendencies in Dutch politicians, and then let's say on the so-called left side, we have a guy called Frans Timmermans who said recently the culture of the Palestinians and Hamas is the culture of death, and we are the culture of the living people. I mean, this it could even be Wilders. I mean, I always say Frans Timmermans is Wilders with a mask on. It is really insane. And this is just totally normalized. We don't have mass protest against a politician who says really crazy, disgusting stuff like this. Yeah. It's maybe not a really positive ending.
No. This is the normalized racism that people often don't see. It reminds me what you say about Frans Timmermans. It reminds me of that EU. What's his name again? Gutierrez or something. What's his name again? Who says that it's the jungle outside and here it's the garden.
Yeah,
that kind of thought process is normal among mainstream politicians without even realizing that it's deeply, deeply racist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess we have to wrap it up here. Super interesting stuff. Glad to meet you guys.
Thanks for coming
I'm happy
on.
we have like-minded individuals in that cold and where we are isolated, cold country where people like us are very isolated. But it's growing, and I think the newer generation it becomes different. Also, when you saw the protests of students in Amsterdam and stuff, I was like, oh, even the Netherlands is joining in now. That's a good sign. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But So very good to have you guys on, and we're gonna invite you again in the near future, and we can keep this conversation going.
Thank you, guys.
Looking forward to it.
Marjolein, thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Yo.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.